Dr. Shivas Amin. Dr. Amin is a Texan. He was born in Spring, lived in Friendswood from 7 years of age on. He went to undergrad at Texas A&M, grad school at Rice. He did his postdoc at BCM and has worked at the University of St. Thomas for the last 9 years as a professor. And he states that nature didn't grab him all at once, but it was a slow, steady build since birth. He chose his genetics major because of the logical puzzles he thought he could solve. When he began hiking, talking to passionate and knowledgeable people, and learning more about all aspects of biology, he found his real passion for the subject. And teaching intro biology, which includes genetics, diversity of life, and ecology, has deepened his love for all living things. One of the main components of his job is to work as an academic advisor for students. He helps them figure out their career goals and develop plans to be successful in life. He's had the opportunity to speak with a wide range of 18 to 22-year-olds about their experiences, hobbies, and goals. Many of them are interested in nature and would even consider a career in ecology, conservation, wildlife management, etc., but have very little experience or exposure to these careers in those industries. As he's grown in his career, he's tried to close that exposure gap by hosting career forums, developing service, research projects for students, and connecting conservation professionals to student groups. When Debbie Bush and I heard his session at the Prairie Conference in 2019, his interest and input into developing students was very clear, and that is why he was invited here today. One last insight. I had asked him if I could reference his marriage to Cassidy Johnson, one of our prior speakers and a person known and respected in the Nipsot Clear Lake. His response, and I quote, "Absolutely. My appreciation for nature exploded when I met Cassidy. She has a strong connection to the outdoors, and her love for nature is infectious. Cassidy is my compass." Very cool. So now it is my pleasure to turn the Zoom over to Dr. Shivas Amin.
It's a new world that we're stepping into. I think everybody's trying to adjust, essentially dealing with what you guys are dealing with right now, which is a world in which we all crave connection, but we are essentially are unconnected from everybody. And so, one of the things that I would like to do is just talk a little bit about what I've learned from kind of working with students in the age of like 18 to 22 years old. And we refer to this group as Generation Z. And I think most conservation efforts and most efforts to kind of engage people in nature often focus at the ages of maybe much younger, right? Going from the age where you can just start walking all the way up into the high school age. But sometimes what happens is we begin to neglect the individuals that are in our college age range. And I think that that's a really important point that I think that most people need to make sure that they always try to include college students at some point, because I think many people pick their career paths based on what they experienced during that very short time in college. And you can imagine that if you have the right experience, you might want to kind of give your time, give your effort, and give your passion to the world of conservation, nature, things like that. And so I really think that it's important that people engage individuals at this point. And so what I hope to do is I hope to share a little insight about this group of students. One of the things that I always try to share with people is that I am an academic advisor, and I specifically ask that to be mentioned. And the reason being is that I kind of have to help individuals figure out what their career goals are. And I don't really tell anybody what their career goals are. I simply just kind of ask them questions and I listen. And it's given me the chance to learn a lot about individuals. And I think one of the first things, if you take anything away from my talk, I think one of the most important things to remember is that if you just take the time to learn about individuals, you'll be able to help them and work with them a lot better. And I think, everybody instinctively, they hear about millennials or they hear about Generation Z, and they get really, really frustrated with the young folks and they wave their fist in the air. And so I think what is really important is that we take a step back and we learn to see what these young people are experiencing. So before I can go too deep, I think we need to figure out like who is who, right? And so I think most people have heard of, like, you might be a this or you might be a that. So basically, I kind of put together this little chart here, and this little blue bar represents whenever you're born, that's the kind of the generation that you're going to fall into, right? And so the silent generation are individuals that were born up to like 1945. Silent generation because they experienced a multitude of wars, and many of those individuals did not make it out of that situation, and thus they're often referred to as the silent generation. The generation that emerged from those world wars, the baby boomers, right? After 1945, they kind of represent the next generation, and kind of one of the most iconic generations. And if anything, some of the poor baby boomers are getting picked on now, which I don't think is fair for them, right? So after that, you get Generation X, which is 1960 to about 1985. And then the millennials, the most hated generation of all, as far as I can tell, started at 1980 and then goes on to about 2005. Ladies and gentlemen, I was born in 1981, so I fall in the millennials. So I really apologize for all of the angst that you may have for them. We're not terrible people, but you know, it's a thing that exists. And then the Generation Z are individuals that generally were born in about the year 2000. And that's the group that is at this point is entering their college age. About 2020 would make you about 18 years old if you're born in this kind of time range right here. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of share what these individuals are experiencing. Actually, before I go that far, I'm kind of curious, like, what does my audience look like? Am I dealing with a bunch of people from baby? I mean, you throw out in the chat kind of where are you in this group? Because I'm always kind of interested. Oh, we got a boomer, we got boomer. Okay, what else do we have in the chat room? We got Gen X, boomer. We got millennial, yes, power to the people. Boomer with two Gen Z kids. There we go. I think Mary could probably teach us a lot as well. Boomers, Gen X. Okay, so we have a healthy mix. But notice in this room, I don't think we have any Gen Zs. And so that's one of the things that I'll point out is that I think that we need to. Oh wow, somebody from the silent generation. That's awesome. I think it's really important to point out that one of the things that we need to start doing is bringing some of these young people in and around us. I think some of the stuff that you guys talk about in your meetings are really interesting to some individuals that would be kind of passionate about the world of conservation and plants. You know, honestly, when students are interested in conservation, the first thing that they'll tell you is they don't know anything. And so even sitting through and listening to your presentations about like the plants of the week and things, or the month and things like that are really valuable. So I think it would be cool to even get people into this situation as well. So at 1981, I'll tell you that I fit right here at this like boomer Generation X like interface. And I often tell people that like I get both generations because I was born in the midline. And I actually think it's been able to help me kind of get the Gen Zers as well. Okay, so let's take a little bit further right here. Oops, I went too far. Okay, so we have this group here. I just took the same graph and I moved it to the bottom of my slide. So here, let me add in here kind of what these individuals have been experiencing, right? So we have on this 1920 on one end of the graph, and it goes all the way to 2020. And what you're going to notice, as you all know, is that the American population has been steadily increasing. Okay, so that is going to have an impact on every single one of these generations, because when you think about it, every single generation has had to deal with a higher level of density than the generation before it. Right, so immediately we can already recognize that it's hard to evaluate each generation based on like what you thought you experienced before, because if you were in the baby boomer generation that we see here, right, I mean, a lot of you were born and there was maybe like 150 million people in the world, and now when these people are born, there's literally double the number of people. That is a staggering amount of people that have like increased in between the majority of what we're seeing in this audience and what the target audience of the future is, right? So double the number of people. And also in red, what we've plotted is the number of petabytes of data per month. So this is the amount of like data that is transferred like on the internet. And notice like until 2000, you don't really get anything that pops up. And that's because, as most of us know, right, the internet was not always a thing. Right? And so I think like we can already see that this generation that was born in the year 2000, about the year 2000, is going to have an incredibly different like interface with the world, with nature even, right? And so I'm even gonna show you some things related to that as well as we get through this. Okay, and so one of the things that I think is just like a massive statistic that I pulled on this. So the percent urban populations that you're seeing here in green, these are listed for each of the years that you see above it. So 1920, 50% or so. And that held on until about 1940. And then you can see now we're up to about 81% of the population living in an urban area. Okay, so most people today that are born are urbanites. They've known nothing but a world that is probably doubly congested than what you experienced. And there's everything that you could ever want on the internet, right? So this is kind of what this generation is defined for, right? So I just kind of threw out some characteristics of what Generation Z usually gets described as. And so these are people that have always had the internet. And I think this is really powerful. I feel blessed to be an individual that was born without the internet. And I think that's probably the only thing, I think only people who were born without the internet will say such a hilarious thing now. Because if you talk to a young person and you give them like your story, right? And I know I'm preaching to the choir because I have a lot of the boomer generation here, but if you tell them about life before the internet, it doesn't make sense to them. It doesn't make sense that you cannot communicate with any person that you want at that moment, including your friends or a local celebrity or even a national celebrity that you can throw like a small text message to, like in a form of a tweet, right? They don't understand that like you could get lost before, right? Now that we have things like Google Maps and social media, people have all of the knowledge that they want in the world. So what I'm gonna do is just for social media, I thought this would be fun. I went and fetched a video off of YouTube that I would like to share right now that kind of chronicles the change in social media, because I think social media is something that really defines these young people. And so what this is how social media has changed over actually their lifetime. So one of the things that I really want to point out is they've always known a lifetime where social media has existed, because this movie is going to start in the year 2003, and you're going to notice that there's already social media groups that exist in 2003. And then what you're going to see is by the time that they are teenagers, there's going to be all kinds of social media. So I'm just going to let this play. And basically, this bar graph represents the number of like monthly users. And so right now you can see over time how the number of users changes. Early on, MySpace was kind of the social media of choice. That's going to go extinct. It's not going to go extinct, but it's certainly not going to be represented the way that it is kind of in modern day. Qzone, this is actually Facebook in China, just so if you're wondering what that is. Facebook will make its rise as we move up through time. So here in 2007, here comes Facebook. It's like I'm calling out like a horse race. Facebook takes the lead, right? Here comes Twitter from the back of the pack. Okay, 2008, 2009, LinkedIn's coming in. We haven't even got, I mean, all of the things that the young people would identify as their social media of choice hasn't even popped in here yet. So here comes Weibo. Weibo is Twitter for Chinese population. Instagram fires through the roof here. It really comes up fast. And I think that it really reflects how technology is changing with these young people as well. So by the time of 2010 comes around, your cell phones are taking better pictures. And so now individuals are sharing more and more pictures with each other. And so that's something that you're noticing as well. I thought it was great for you guys to talk about how you guys are plugged into social media, because that's very, very important for this group as well. Okay, so now here coming 2015. Almost getting closer and closer to modern day. But again, we still haven't seen the social media du jour, which is TikTok, pop in here, right? Everybody knows about TikTok now. So Instagram rose to the top. Again, I think this has a lot to do with the rise of cell phones in general use. And here comes TikTok out of nowhere. And TikTok is going to experience a very quick rise. And again, part of this is related to cell phone technology. If anybody doesn't know what the specialty of TikTok is that it actually takes like short movies. And so as individuals have the ability to make more and more short movies, it's something that actually rises as well. Okay. There's something going on in the chat. Let me see if there's anything going on. What's TikTok? Okay, I think I answered what TikTok is like. This is what the kids do now, right? So now I sound like a really old guy, but this is what the kids do now. Okay, so TikTok is basically like social media where you share short videos. Okay, kids love this thing. I don't know why. Um, you know, all social media has that kind of weird aspect to it. If you're not plugged into that social media platform, you probably look at it and you can't understand why people are actually doing these things. But TikTok is quite famous. I think most of you should know about it now because the president is quite upset with it. So you know, these kinds of things are constantly changing, and a hallmark of these young individuals, right? Always remember that they are experiencing social media in a way that's different than you, and it is almost too much for them. Okay. All right. So one of the things that I really like to point out, just to get away from the social media concept, but it is very important. It should always be thought of. Like, we have a shorter news cycle now too than when I was a child as well, right? And I think you all can recognize that as well. They're not interacting with nature. I pointed out previously in the other slide how there is an increase in urbanization for these individuals. And you know, I leave this last one, Google Maps, and the reason is it's a really nice segue, because one of the things that I like to do often is kind of take people into the idea of like what these individuals are experiencing. Okay, so one of the ways that I do this is I just download Google Earth Pro. And this used to be something you had to pay for, but now it's free. And with Google Earth Pro, you can actually get the historical satellite image. And there's some good satellite image of some parts of Houston from all the way from 1944. And being kind of a techno junkie that I am, I just kind of went and started just downloading pictures from different parts of time, and I constructed movies with them. And when I first made the movies, I just kind of did it for fun, just to make time-lapse movies. And then after I made these movies, I felt terrible, and I decided to make other people watch them. And so this really is just this moment where I'm actually just forcing you people to watch these videos. And most of you know things about prairies and you know things about conservation. And so what you're looking at here, I think if you are an experienced eye, you can pick out features of a prairie. You might be able to pick out the potholes. You might be able to pick out some of the sand mounds that exist, right? So in this area, you can see diverse features, including these depressions, which you see in this darkness. And you can see these white dots everywhere, which kind of represent different sand mounds that you're getting everywhere. So what this video is going to do is it's going to show you just different images from different times in our kind of timeline. And here on the right side, you're going to see what year it is for each image. I'm just so you know, it's not going to go well. In 1944, this is all kind of empty. There's a good chunk of prairie out here. When this is done, you're not going to see a whole lot. So pick your favorite feature and you're going to watch it disappear at some point. So here we go. Yes, 1978, subdivisions moving in. 1989, moving in everywhere now. 1995, we're barely holding on here. And then this happens. This is a mall. Yep, 2012. So this movie ends in 2012. It's when I originally made this movie. I'm sure if I went back and I brought up the 2020 image, more of this is going to be gone. I think this is an incredibly powerful video to show individuals because I don't think they realized like how much life has changed. Oops, I went too far. In that short amount of time. To go, I mean, if you really want to quantify 1944, right, we're talking about 80 years. There are people alive, right, that actually experienced this. And I know that because when I asked you if anybody was kind of from the silent generation, somebody said yes. So somebody has actually experienced this. Now, I don't know if they were in Houston, but that gives you like a really jarring understanding of what is going on in the world of Houston. Since 1944, we have lost so much. And really, if I'm going to play this video one more time, the kids that are alive today, they never saw this. They never saw this. They didn't see this. They didn't see this. That's all they know. This is what they know. They know urbanization. Let's try another one. Okay, so this is at a different place. So that mall that I was showing you, that was a Katy Mills Mall. It sits on what used to be a very pretty prairie. This is actually closer to the city. This is Rice University down here that you're seeing here, and this is the park. You're going to see a few things change here. One of the reasons why I like to show this is the University of St. Thomas is over here. So when I give this talk to people that are familiar with the university, they can see also what was around us. And this area right here is a perfectly nice set of prairie. Just imagine if we could have saved that, right? If we could have saved this spot, 1944, this nice prairie, we have these indentations, these pimple mounds. This would be a really cool place that we could have had a nice prairie in the middle of the city. One of the things that if anybody knows this part of town, it's not a prairie, obviously, not driven across a giant prairie in the middle of the city, but it's going to go very poorly for this patch of land that is left. So I think that's one thing that's really interesting is you notice that like our urban landscape protected some areas, but what happens is commercialization comes in and destroys most of it. So let's take a look at this. This is 1944. 1953, we're still holding on in that little spot, and 1978 is gone. And it's just a sea of buildings. I mean, I think sometimes when we go into like this part of the area, when you go into Rice Village, you know, you can see all of the, or you like in West U, and you can see all the trees, and it feels really like you have some experience with nature. But in reality, like there is very little. It's all concrete around us, and that's what these kids have seen since they've been born. And this is kind of what they live with day in and day out. And I think it's important to remember this. And not only do they know that this is kind of all they've seen in their life, they know that this didn't used to be this, right? So that's the power of information now. There are so many things on TV and the news. Even David Attenborough just is putting together a new series about extinction. We know what we're losing. Right? Ignorance is no longer a viable cop-out in the situation. Everybody knows what's going on, and now is the time to try to do something. And what's really exciting about these young people is that they kind of know that this is not what they were, what they really wanted to see in nature. They want to see actual nature, and I think a lot of them are pushing towards that. So let's take a look. I still have more videos because I couldn't let you off scot-free. So one of the things that I want to do for this talk, I want to make one special for y'all. I actually made a couple for y'all that I thought were special. This is Clear Lake, okay? So this is Clear Lake City. One of the reasons why I normally don't use this part of the world to make imagery for these kinds of movies is that the imagery is inconsistent. So some areas you'll see the imagery is updated at different times. But nevertheless, the story is the same here as it is everywhere. Just if you're wondering, this is Ellington Field. I'm sure most of you know that, right? So let's go ahead and watch what happens to Clear Lake. So this is when our young people are born, 2003. We'll still fill out little pieces of it here. Still putting new stuff everywhere. I don't know how long we have left until most of this probably turns into what we see here today. I didn't come to just rub everybody's nose in it. One of the things that I thought I would do too, since I grew up in Friendswood, and this was something that was discussed earlier. Yeah, I agree, right? Thank goodness for individuals that save things. I mean, one of the greatest takeaways that you can ever take from looking at these is that we have to save more things. Because we are completely irresponsible. We won't turn anything into a subdivision. So it was mentioned earlier that I'm from Friendswood. So what I thought I would do as well is I would just show you my childhood home. Okay, so this is where I grew up in Friendswood. It's not going to stay like this. Obviously, anybody who's ever driven through Friendswood. There it comes. Yeah, that's us coming through. That's little Shivas right there destroying parts of the, yeah, there we go. sometimes I think the knee-jerk reaction is to look at a video like this and say, we're not doing that bad. We've got green stuff over here, and we've got open space over here, and we've got open space over here. But then when you like go back and look at like what it originally looked like, you can see that there is so much more congestion than what used to be. Okay, last one, I promise. And this one I'm just putting in because I thought this one was a really jarring one for me. My sister also lives in Friendswood, and she moved back there after living in a couple of different places. This is this neighborhood called the Forest of Friendswood. And when I saw this, my heart broke a little bit because I never realized in 1944 that there was this elaborate nature of trees that kind of just spread out along some of these creeks and bayous. And some of this is going to get turned into residential, and some of it's going to get turned into a golf course. Let's see what happens here. So the bottom of that imagery was updated first. You can see we've started the ingress into that little beautiful little forest. 1995, we're still doing decent. Here he comes. Yeah. It goes really bad there like at 2000. We put in a huge subdivision. There's my sister's house. And then we put in a huge golf course. And what's left here is just completely fragmented and wouldn't really represent what an individual, if they were born in, say, like 1940, what they could have experienced in the same area, right? And so I showed all of these depressing videos to depress you. Sorry about that. But I think it's important that we really understand what these young people have been born into. They actually, because they have seen nothing but nature, right? They spend a lot more time like thinking about it than you might expect, because I think to some degree, it's like something that used to exist. It's almost like the dinosaur to some degree. And so a lot of young people are craving these kinds of experiences, and they're kind of craving this kind of stuff to be outside, to plant plants, to understand how they grow. A lot of young people are interested in this kind of stuff. And so I thought I would just give you some characteristics of these individuals that I have picked up on. Part of it from studying what they've gone through, looking at how the world has changed through their own eyes, but also kind of putting it back together and kind of speaking with most of them. Most of them have this thing, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, called FOMO, fear of missing out, right? This is such like a young person to do, to take like a term and like shrink it into like some cutesy saying. But FOMO, like fear of missing out. So a lot of these kids have this concept that they are missing out on something, which I think is really, really important, because it's something that, like, as conservation specialists or individuals that want to interact with young people, you can kind of exploit, right? You can essentially convince them that there is something that is really cool and neat that they can miss out on if they don't participate. And many of them do care about the environment. As like I said, they know that this stuff existed, that it just is not there anymore. One of the things that most of you have probably recognized, though, is that some of these kids do not do something because you tell them to do something, right? I mean, you can tell them to do something and they say, why do I have to do that? And you could say, I said so, and they still won't do some of these things. And I think I see this more often than not. I'm at the college level. When I first started teaching, and I haven't been teaching for that long, I've been teaching for 10 years, but when I first started teaching, the group that I had, if I told them to do something, they would very much do it. And then I recognized as time went on, the more that I just kind of told them to do something didn't work. I had to give them a reason why they needed to do something and why it would be beneficial for them to do those kinds of things. And for me as like a teacher, it's really easy, right? Like if you're in my class and you want to be a doctor or a veterinarian and you don't want to study genetics or how genes are passed or any of these kinds of things, I can easily tell you, like, if you don't study, you're not going to become the thing that you want to do. But I think it's always important that you have to give an individual a reason. They need reasons to do things, okay? And they crave individuality. This is something that I found. Like, all of them want to have their individual moment. They want to take a picture of themselves in a special place. And so, you know, if you take them to a prairie, they may take selfies of themselves in the prairie. And that's something that you can look at and start to shake your head at. But at the same time, like, recognize there's double the amount of people in this world that were like when they were born than when you were born. So their desire for individuality is something that's an extension of how many dang people are literally everywhere. Okay. And the thing that this group has, which is really interesting, is that they have the tools to understand most of the society's biggest problems. They have so much information at the tips of their fingertips, or at their fingertips, so much so like it's annoying at times, right? It's like sometimes if you ask them like a very basic question, somebody will just look up an answer instead of trying to think it through. But they do have tools to kind of understand and solve these things. I mean, think about some of the tools that you in the conservation industry use now, right? So iNaturalist is an incredible thing to kind of organize projects. Things like that did not exist before. So we have great tools, and the kids are pretty good at using these things if you can kind of show them around. And the reason for that is most of them have spent too much time online. We all know that. We can't get kids off their cell phone, their iPads, whatever they might have their faces buried into. We can't get their faces out of it. And a lot of that reasons is because there's a whole industry dedicated to making sure those kids keep their faces buried in those digital worlds. But at the same time, we can always drag them out, okay? And so I've always just thought that you can pull a young person out of their cell phone. You can pull them out of their iPad, but you've got to figure out how to do it the right way. And so I kind of put together like a general guide to get young people interested, because I told you like they won't do something just because you told them. So the first thing that you always want to do is you kind of want to educate them a little bit, right? So you have to start from something, show them something that is really interesting, educate them, but use that education as a way to like inspire them. I think that's something that's really important. Like if you teach them something that's really neat, a lot of young people will go, that's really neat. What else can I learn about that, right? And so use education as a way to kind of bring them in and inspire them. And then once you've got them inspired, force them to plan and act, right? So that's something that I did a lot of. And so a lot of what I'm taking from this plan here is what I taught in my ecology class. And I haven't taught my ecology class in a few years, which sucks, but I do enjoy teaching it. And this is something that I do. I teach them things. I inspire them by getting them interested in things. And then I ask them to take plan and make an action plan, right? I make them do something. I make them think of something. I make them use their imagination to come up with a solution with a problem. If you wanted to get a preserve and you had a certain amount of money, what would you do? Just general things to force individuals to use their brain. But part of this is not to just kind of make them think. Part of it is so that they feel like they have a role in this process. So as I mentioned, they have this hyper sense of individuality. So you want to give them the opportunity to feel like they are part of this process and not just a foot soldier that you're telling to do something. Because as I told you before, they will not do something just because you told them to do something. And so get them to be a part of it, get them to plan, get them to act, and then document things. Use social media for your advantage. Get individuals on Facebook, get individuals on Instagram. Use any way that you can to communicate and share this information out to other students. Because what you want to do is you want to generate that fear of missing out, right? You want them to kind of think that they're going to miss out on something. And the way that you do that is by sharing what you've done, which is really cool, on like social media, and then trying to connect with young people. That's the other part about it. You can't just wait for them to come find you. You have to go reach them. So one of the ways that I accomplish this in my ecology class is I have them read this book called The Sixth Extinction. If you've never read this book, I really recommend it. It's a really easy read. And the concept of this book is really straightforward. It's just a deep dive into the concept of extinction from the aspect of scientists studying extinction processes, right? So there's an individual in the Amazon rainforest studying deforestation. There's individuals studying reef systems that are being degraded. There's even individuals studying like amphibian conservation, and the Houston Zoo is featured in that because the Houston Zoo does Houston toad conservation. And if anybody knows Paul Crump, he's currently the Texas State herpetologist, but at the time he worked for the Houston toad program, and he was actually down in Panama where there is this amphibian ark. And Elizabeth Colbert, the author, was actually interviewing Paul. And so if anybody knows Paul, go check the book out. It's really cool. If not, it's still a really great read. And one of the things that I think is really cool is that it highlights extinction in the past, present, and future. And I think it's more inspiring than a textbook. I think it's much better to use in a textbook. I mean, the reason why I think it's much better than a textbook is that it induces a serious amount of guilt. In the same way that you probably watched those videos at the beginning of my talk and you felt a little bit guilty about the world and you felt maybe a little bit more primed to do something, this book is wonderful at inducing guilt. And here's the thing. you need to get that guilt, and you need to nurture that guilt, and you need to use that guilt in order to get young people to do things. Because if you don't guilt them into something, sometimes they won't do anything. And the thing is like, I think when we all see these movies and we all kind of learn about these things, we inherently feel this guilt. And I think to some degree, maybe we hide these things from our children, right? So instead of showing them the true nature of extinction, maybe we just show them like the YouTube videos of the beautiful birds chirping about, and we don't tell them that, oh, these might only be the last few set of these birds, because we don't want them to feel sad and we don't want them to feel guilty. And we've got to stop doing that. Just straightforward, we've got to stop doing that, because everybody needs to see what's going on, and young people will react. If you tell them that this is for your generation to fix because the rest of the generation screwed it up, which is the truth. We've all screwed it up, and the only way that we're going to get there is if these young people start doing something. And so I nurture that guilt, I work with them in that guilt, and then once that guilt is at its highest level, I try to get them to do something. And so one of the things that I have them do is come up with a plan of action, as I mentioned before. And one of my students came up with a simple plan. She said, let's build a prairie on campus. And I thought it was a really cool idea, but I didn't think it was possible. And the reason why I didn't think it was possible is because I've worked with some of our facilities groups before, and they were not very interested in letting me put in a prairie. So I did what any sane individual would do with this. And instead of asking myself, I sent a young child in to ask. So I sent my students in to ask facilities, because they're the ones that wanted the prairie. And I actually got traction that way. So sometimes sending a young person in is far better than sending an old person in, because sometimes that will inspire guilt in a different direction. So I think I sent a young group of students in, and they asked to plant a prairie on campus, and they got permission to do it. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to briefly tell you the story of what they did, because I myself was inspired by this. So I gave some details in my intro that my love for nature has steadily grown. And it has steadily grown even like day by day. Every time I experience nature, but also like when I see what nature is capable of. And I think this project wasn't interesting to me because it showed me what students are capable of. I learned that, and I've always known that students are capable of great things if they put their energy and their mind to it. What I thought was really cool is what life will do if you just give it a chance in the right way. So this is our proposed area. This is in 2017. This student right here, her name is Erin Novak. Erin Novak is currently at Texas A&M getting a degree, a master's degree, hopefully a PhD. I'm trying to push her to get a PhD. And her advisor wants to get her PhD in wildlife management, where she's basically learning how to use fire to manage wild areas, which is really cool. And Erin was a great student, deeply devoted to the environment. When she first came to University of St. Thomas, everybody in her family was telling her that she needed to be a nurse or a doctor. And the one thing that I want to tell you about this girl is like, she could have done any of those things. She was like a straight A student, one of the smartest students that you'll ever find. But I think what happened is she literally read this book and she decided that she wanted to change her pathway in life. She wanted to do something more meaningful. And so this was the start of it. She came up with a plan, and she organized a lot of student groups. And our goal was to try to turn this green grass into a prairie. And so the first thing that we did is we sprayed some herbicide out there, and we kind of cut out all of the dead turf grass. And so this is our turf grass cutout that we have here. And we even put a little sign that explains why is the grass dying. This was something that was kind of recommended to us by Jaime Gonzalez, which I'm sure many of you have known Jaime Gonzalez. Jaime is a very active individual in the prairie conservation industry, and he was very helpful. At the time he was working for the Katy Prairie Conservancy, he was very helpful in getting a lot of this stuff done. And Lan Shen, who also works for the Katy Prairie Conservancy, also helped us and still helps us greatly with certain things out there. And so I think that's one of the important things before I go too far is make sure you get good partners. If you're ever going to do anything like this, like there's a lot of people in the community that will be active and want to help you. You just got to reach out and ask for their help, and they will help you. So we cut that grass out. It's University of St. Thomas, so it's a Catholic institution. So I had to get a priest to bless the ground. Doesn't matter if I'm not Catholic or not. I just felt like it was proper protocol. So this is Father Ted. If anybody ever goes out to this is going to be at the end of this. You'll see it's the Father Meyers Pocket Prairie. And if you Google Father Meyers Pocket Prairie, we actually have like a little pin on Google, so I'm quite proud of it. Father Ted is a priest that used to work at the institution. He taught French. He retired, but he's an orchid just enthusiast, and he has an orchid greenhouse that's behind the Prairie. You can kind of see it in this picture right here. It looks like a little shanty. It's okay. Don't tell him I said that, but it's nice if you go inside. It's not nice, but the plants are nice. But if you go inside, don't wear a backpack. That's his only rule, because he's always worried about people with their backpacks knocking off plants. That's maybe not a rule for you guys, because I'm not sure many of y'all travel with backpacks like college students do, but that's his rule anyways. So you can go in there and there's beautiful orchids in there. So he blessed our ground, which eventually I think was really important, because we got a lot of good stuff out of this Prairie at some point. So I think Father Ted helped at some point. We had a bunch of soil delivered, and then we just got to it. We had a ton of volunteers. And I think that's what's really cool is I kind of asked Aaron to reach out to the student groups. And you should understand, I'm a huge pessimist. Like, I'm the biggest pessimist in the world. I have people, when they work for me and they're trying like student like initiatives, and like they come up with this idea to like help students, like they'll come to me and they'll tell me the idea, and I'm like, yeah, I think that's a really cool idea. I don't think anybody's going to go to it. I mean, that's just the kind of person I am. I never think that people are going to take the time to do things. And Erin reached out to a bunch of different student clubs, and she got tons of people out there. And these kids were so happy to be out there. And I think part of it is that they felt like they were putting something down important, but also they just wanted to go outside and play in the dirt. And I think that one of the things I'll tell you is that kids that are 18, they still like to play in the dirt. So don't think that that's something that goes away. Okay. So Jaime came out, he gave the students like a nice educational lesson about prairies, which I thought was really good. And they listened to him for as long as they could stand, because they're still kids and they still wanted to get around and running. One of the cool things that Jaime did was he brought out the Indian grass root display that they have. Essentially, they show how deep the roots go down into the ground. The kids were blown away that the roots go down something like 9 to 12 feet underneath some of these bunch grasses. And I think that in its moment really helped sell some of these kids into this process as well. And that's something that I pointed out before. Always, when you're working with this group, with this age of students, really show them why things are important, and don't just do it once. Try to kind of continually show these things are important. So we had a ton of donated plants from the community. It was really great. The kids went out, they kind of dug out the little holes for the plants. We had a ton of community volunteers that were willing to educate students, which was really helpful as well. So that's one of those things, if there's a volunteer event and you're trying to bring in college students and things like that, go out there and kind of help them. I mean, just because they're older doesn't mean they know what they're doing. And it can always be really good to go out there and help some of these students out. We also put out some seed, which I think was really important, and I'll explain why here in a second. And so at the end, we took this kind of green lawn and we kind of made it into this pocket prairie system. We even put out like a little watering system. We'll address that in a minute as well. We have these tubs out here, which in the last year were converted, at least this tub right here was converted into an native aquatic plant display. So I keep having students that rotate in like semester after semester who are just kind of interested in, and I had an individual named Arturo Aguilar, and Arturo worked for Green Star Wetland Plants. And as part of the Prairie, he just had an individual project, and he set up like a little display here of like aquatic plants that you can find in the area as well. So we've got different things that are coming out as well. We even have like a little signage that goes back here that we put up since this picture as well. And so this was our first day after we kind of put our Prairie together. We were very proud of it. And after about 4 months, all that it was a bunch of like sunflower, like all the same monoculture of sunflower. And it honestly, it looked terrible. It looked awful. The guy from facilities who originally let us do it, he comes to me, he comes to my office. He goes, Shivas, is it going to look like this all the time? And I'm like, what do you mean? It looks good. And he looked at me and he goes, it looks like an abandoned lot. And he's like, I don't like this. And I said, don't worry. I think it's going to get better at some point. And it did. But, this first run, we put it out, and the sunflowers, they just really like disturbed soil. So they did really well. And it kind of gives off like a new park, or like a newly mowed kind of strip of land vibe. I don't know. I got a question in the chat. Let's see. Sunflower did really well. Looked bad. Yeah, it did. It really did. This is a picture from inside the Prairie. It's nothing but sunflower. And I didn't lie to the students. I told them this is not what we were going for. We were not going for like a complete sunflower like overload. You can see there's other things in it, and they would eventually seed out and they would make it look better at some point. So that September or so that December we went through, I always have a surplus of volunteers. We went down and we just kind of cut the thing down, right? We just got the image of sunflower over our head, and basically kind of started over. And the next year was awesome. Okay, so the next year, this is early April, and the wildflowers, I just took pictures. I would go there like every week and I would just take pictures. And I think the thing that was really fun about this is that the colors change over time. And I'm sure those of you that know that manage prairies or something like that, it's just amazing how the colors will change. So we snuck some bluebonnets in there. And so the bluebonnets come out real early, in early April. So here's a picture of the whole kind of prairie in early April. And then the wine cups will start coming in. The rosin weeds will start coming in. You'll get some new color that come in. And what's really neat is that now I've had a few seasons to go through it. And so it's like predictable, right? You know that these wine cups are going to come at a certain time. You know that the rosin weeds are going to come out at a certain time. And you can kind of point that out to students, which is really fun. And so, you know, as time goes on, you get all these different colors that slowly build. By mid-May, we were getting a lot of purple in the prairie, which I thought was just gorgeous. Again, you know, the prairie just kind of, it takes a little wildness to it, but when the wildflowers are diverse and you have a lot of different colors, the facilities department doesn't come to my office and complain. So this switched it. At this year, people started to come by the prairie, and I noticed that people thought it was like really interesting and they were really drawn to it. I got a lot of questions about it, just kind of hanging out there. And so in February, as you know, it'll go gray. So we cut it down again. So we're continuing with the tradition of working with the prairie. These are now students. This right here is Arturo. He's the one that set up the wet prairie or the water plant display. These are new students. These students were not here for the original planting 2 years before, right? So these are now freshmen that are coming in. So this is a project that is growing with them, and they still feel a connection to it, which is really neat. And even about a month and a half ago, I still had people from the community working with it. So I had a Boy Scout troop coming to harvest basket flower, because I have some really great basket flower that kind of blooms out there and gets incredibly tall at the end of it. But it's still an active project. We've got a lot of students involved in it. And I still get question after question from students. What is this thing? They don't know they've never heard of a prairie. What can I do with it? What do you do with this thing, right? And I think that their curiosity is piqued right at the beginning. Why do you have all of these plants just kind of running wild in this area? And just so you know, I manicure my prairie to be kind of a wildscape. I don't really cut the paths out that much. I keep it a little bit wild. And part of it is so the students understand that this is not meant to be like a garden. This is meant to be a home for creatures that we evolved with on this planet as well. And what we do is we're helping those individuals around us. And I think, you know, in those videos I showed you, these kids have never known anything but the urban world, but they know that nature exists out there. And so really just going out and having the ability to connect with nature and seeing something and knowing that this is what Houston used to be like is very powerful to them. And honestly, like, you probably have had this moment with a lot of young people, which I think is really cool. I particularly like to teach 18 and 22-year-olds because I think sometimes when you hit them with that like mallet of knowledge and they get that look like, oh my God, in their face, it's something that sticks with them forever. And so I think it's really cool to see them kind of acknowledge what prairie systems can do in the world, and kind of want to take an interest in working with it themselves. And so one of the things that I've tried to preach to every individual that I've ever shared with this project is that at some point it's going to look like crud. And at some point you're going to cut down some of the grasses. You're going to have just like little patches of green stuff poking through, and sometimes it won't look good. And what I've asked everybody in that moment is to look at it and recognize that you need to redefine your sense of beauty. I do not understand what it has made human beings lust after, like short, tiny grass that they control and that they dominate, and that there's no wildness to it. Everybody wants to have a lawn of monoculture that they cut into like some small little aspect that I don't know why. I don't know why we do this. And I think, you know, one of the things I'd like to plug, you know, I'll plug your own talk. Anna Valerie is going to come and talk about turning your turf grass lawn into native plants. And I think that is something that is just so necessary. I love Anna, by the way. She's a really cool person. And I mean, I've talked to her about this exact thing before. And I think that what we need to start doing is start approaching nature responsibly. right? I don't understand why we cannot have more native plants in our yards. And I know that people will say HOAs are the problems. And what I would say is, I'm in a room full of baby boomers. Tell these HOAs to stop doing this so that people can actually enjoy a piece of nature in their world, right? And so ask people to start redefining their sense of beauty. And I think my students get it. That's what I think is really cool, is that an 18-year-old or 22-year-old will begin to look at a lawn, and they'll look at me and they'll say, Dr. Amin, why do we do this? And I said, I don't really know. It's an African grass. Like, why do we use an African grass? Well, because it holds the turf really well when we're doing construction. And you can tell they just look at it and they don't understand why the world has come to this point, right? And it seems perfectly obvious to every single one of the other generations on that chart that I showed you before why we plant turf grass. But if you ask young people after they've had an experience with a prairie, especially one that you put in an urban area, which I think is really powerful about this prairie, is it literally exists in an urban area. There are houses around it. There's a school around it. I mean, it's in the middle of like the city. People begin to realize, like, we are not doing what we're supposed to be doing with our lawns, and the young people are realizing that. So I think what has to happen to some degree is that we should join the young people in this movement and support them. So that's one thing that I'll just kind of point out there. And be patient. That's the other thing. When doing something like this, always be patient, because, you know, your first round of setting up prairies, if you ever set up a pocket prairie, it's not going to look good right off the bat. I'm sure some people have had some really good luck doing it. Ours was terrible, but now it's gorgeous, right? It's a little overgrown right now, but, you know, as I said, redefine your sense of beauty. Understand that this is what we are supposed to be experiencing, not grass that's this tall and meant to be kept that tall, right? Okay, so after I've kind of just talked a little bit about my own efforts there, I thought I would just kind of reflect about how we can grow with this young group, because I think they're primed to grow with us. So the first thing is you tell people the truth. Be honest. I've always been honest with young people, and I think that's one of my strengths, is that I don't really care about sugarcoating anything. I will just bluntly tell people what the truth is. And I think young people at the age of 18 to 22, they really appreciate your honesty. A lot of them have been told fairy tales for their whole life, and now they want to hear what the truth is, and they feel like they're ready for the truth. So tell them what the truth is. It's not going well, and we need your help desperately, right? Provide a purpose for all of the activities that you do and an expected outcome. Let them know what you're trying to achieve. You know, when we were building that prairie, I tried to tell them what we were going to achieve. Obviously, after the first year, we didn't achieve what we wanted to, but next time I bring a new group in, even if there's holdovers from that first group, I can say, hey, we didn't achieve what we wanted last time. Now this is our goal. We have expected outcomes, right? Embrace that digital communication for information, to share your events, but also just to share beauty. I think that you'll notice that young people call it an Instagram culture, and they frown their face at it. But a lot of kids just want to take pictures of themselves in really, really pretty spots. I don't really know what's wrong with that unless I'm trying to enjoy that pretty spot. And then I'm really angry at that child for sitting there with like their selfie stick taking pictures. But at the same time, like, kind of ask them to do it. Promote that environment, that the prairie is beautiful, that you should take your photos in the prairie, that you should take selfies in the prairie. I think it's a really good thing to do. I even had a selfie competition in the prairie once, right? I made them take pictures and stuff like that. I thought it was really fun. Just bigger things. But I think we need to start creating more jobs for young people in prairie and conservation, because if they knew that those jobs were there and they were going to be sustainable, they would commit their lives to it. But the problem is that young people recognize that there is less stability sometimes in the prairie community than there might actually be, say, like going to medical school or something like that. So I think one of the things that you should try to do is see if you own a business or own a company that's involved in this, look for ways to get college students jobs in this area, maybe even part-time jobs that they can work in the evenings, or they can work in the early mornings. I think those things are really important because they will impact individuals as they make their choice in careers. Directly connect young people to nature, like put them outside, put them in nature, put them in volunteering events, put them with their hands in the dirt. I think these things are really important. They spend a lot of time sitting in classrooms. They spend a lot of time on Zoom sessions now, right? That's something I'll talk about here in a second. But if you keep going back to the same old thing, putting people in Zoom and putting people in classrooms to learn more, you'll lose them. They want to be involved in the process. And so one of the things that you should do is try to partner in places where young people already are frequenting. Teachers, professors, churches, community centers. try to get as many people to partner with you that have young people and bring them in different ways. I think it's always very important. And then I always say, nurture the request for individuality. If you try to shove them into one spot, they're going to run away from you anyways, right? So nurture that quest for individuality. Okay, so one of the main things that I want to point out is that diversity is the key to future success. And I'm just going to point this out. I'm rather apolitical. I hate political arguments. When two people start talking about politics, I want to leave the room immediately because I know that people really don't change their minds, and every single political argument is just kind of wasted. So don't think I would waste my time here giving you a political argument. I'm not telling you that diversity is important for equality or social justice. While it might be, I don't think that's what I'm trying to share here. I think diversity is the key, because if we don't embrace diversity, and I know that the people here are like-minded, they want to see nature grow and prosper. If we don't embrace that diversity, we're going to lose. We're going to lose very quickly. And I'll show you why. So this is the United States by ethnicity. Again, it's a similar situation where you see the charts grow. This starts in 1630. It's going to take way too long for me to get to the point that I want to make. So I'm going to jump us ahead to maybe like the 1800s. We'll go even a little further. Okay, late 1800s. You can see it's really just white and black people at this point. Hispanic people start kind of pumping in here, late 1800s. Again, we're far, far away from where even everybody in this audience is. Okay, so now we're getting to something that I showed in the video here. So when we get into the 1900s, 1920s, 1940s, this is what the silent generation kind of experienced from our population. Overwhelming majority of people when they were born were white. Very little diversity in the world. It's not like this is a bad thing. This is just the reality. There were just mostly white people in the United States at this point. You start getting into the 50s and the 60s, and you start to see the different ethnicities start to grow within the United States of America. And really in the 70s, we start to see some of this start to grow. And at the same time, the number of white individuals is decreasing, and what you'll see at some point is a number of individuals with two or more ethnicities is going to start growing as well. And so this melting pot of the United States is something that is very much happening. Individuals are intermingling within their races, but also we have immigration and things like that. But let me go back, because this is a plot that also goes into the future, so don't think we're hit off there. So let me go here to 2020. So that's modern day. So what you see here is that there is a huge mix of diversity in the United States of America. And so if you are not reaching out to a diverse population, you're literally cutting out half of the population. Now, political leanings aside, if you do that, you're not going to save any of the things that you want to save, right? In order to save things, you have to go and engage with a population that may or may not be different than you, and you have to get them invested in it the same way that you are, right? So one of the things that I've always pointed out is I think diversity is the key to success in the future of conservation, and especially with young people. And as you can tell, there is a lot of young people that are diverse. Generation Z have only known a mega diverse world, right? That's all they've really known, an urban mega diverse world. That's all they know. Okay, also just a special note, I think COVID is gonna force us to reset a little bit, right? I think we're starting to get there, but COVID is really interesting because we've all been locked away from each other for far too long. And I think it's making some of us crazy and making us do some crazy things. Most of what we now do is digital and on the screen. And I've noticed that young people wanna go outside. Everybody wants to go outside. It doesn't matter that it's incredibly hot in Houston and oppressive. People will still want to go outside because we're all doing this. We're all sitting inside. We all have our computers, right? And so I think this is a good opportunity. If you're willing to reach out to young people, now is the time, because they are all stuck sitting inside, staring at a computer, and they would just love to get outside and stick their hands in some dirt and be educated on something, okay? And so as you might expect, some people don't want to get groups back together, and there's a really good reason for that, right? So I want you to think about, you're going to get kind of two populations of people that slowly emerge out of the COVID pandemic. You're going to get some people that still want that authentic interaction where they want to meet with people. So think about having small groups of students, because they're going to want to come out, but you don't want to make too big of a group because you can then cause problems, right? So think about small groups, make it fun, social distance, all of the important things. But the other thing that some people will just want to stay home. They will not want to come out. They will not want to go in public. And here I think is a perfect time for us to switch. Bring this to your house. change what you're doing at your house. Bring native plants to your home. And then you can not only impact, say, the people that I'm talking about, but you'll get the young people on board too. Because if you have mom and dad who are pulling up some of their turf grass and they're putting in native plants, the young people or the kids are going to see that. And then when they come to me at 18 or 19, they're already going to know about that. They're going to be more primed to be interested in to work on those kinds of things. Because remember, exposure is the biggest key, right? So I think a really good push now would be to get people to start doing some of this stuff at home as well. And I already mentioned this, form partnerships with teachers and communities, because they need this more than ever. They need you who are out in nature. They need you so bad to connect the young people who are stuck behind a computer, right? So connect with individuals. You could just do distance projects, or you could have people go to preserves or whatever, but there's a lot of good things that we can do right now because of the mentality of people. We're just stuck inside. We want to go out. Okay, I've shared most of the things that I feel like I'm probably like an expert on. Like, I'm probably an expert of dealing with like 18 to 22-year-old kids. But one of the things I wanted to do is at the end of this is to share something that I'm not an expert on, and that's prairie management. And so when we started this process, I made Erin come up with a plan of how we were going to manage this thing beyond like what we were going to do. And she came up with a management plan, and then life got very busy and I just had to kind of figure out what to do on the fly. And one of the things that I've noticed is that you have to cut prairies often, right? So you have to cut them at the end of the summer. You have to cut them in February. Trimming sunflowers is really helpful. I think Wendy in her video talked about trimming goldenrod, which I think is also, we don't have any goldenrod in our prairie, but I think any of those really tall growers, the basket flower that's in our prairie has this ability to get up to some ridiculous height. It gets up to like 12 feet, 15 feet sometimes. So I have to go cut that one. So trimming your prairie regularly is a really good idea. When we put out our prairie, especially, this is something that I think is really relevant to urban prairies. So that's the kind of thing that I want to point out, is that a lot of what I'm going to share with you is relative to urban prairies. And there's unique problems with the urban prairie. So one of the reasons why you need to continually trim your prairie is because people will get angry in urban settings if it gets too parking lot-y, right? If you have those sunflowers that are just dominating over the top, you need to cut them and keep them low and have them bloom a little bit lower so people will be interested in them. The other thing that I think is really key about urban prairies is that you need to put seed out. We transplanted a lot of plants, but because there's so much heat, urban heat, right? Because you're talking about building these right next to roads. Some of these plants that we transplanted that came from like prairies were like, what am I doing here? It is so hot. Like, why am I in the middle of this like busy intersection, right? So seeding was really important because the plants that come out of the seed are a little bit better. I think just because they've made it in that environment, they're going to stay in that environment, which is something that you're looking for, because not everything's going to want to bloom in your urban prairie. Like they're going to bloom out maybe at the Katy Prairie Conservancy out in the middle of nowhere, right? One of the things that I've said, like, we put that watering system, I showed you that picture of the watering system. I did not need that watering system. That prairie, I've never watered it. Water is almost a problem with that prairie because when it gets too much water, the plants just blast off. So I've never had to water that prairie. I don't plan on ever watering that prairie. And I think that in and alone is just a perfect sales point for the prairies itself, because it shows you like how we've created jobs for ourselves by making lawns. We've basically created something that wants us to cut it really short, and then we have to water it all the time. I don't have to water that prairie. People always ask, do we have snakes? No snakes. We do have rabbits that live in it, which is kind of cool. We have all kinds of diversity from the insect world, as you might expect. And we have many types of birds that come in and frequent it throughout the year. My gravel path disappeared. I'm sure people know that this will happen, but sometimes when you have an open space in your prairie, everything wants to bloom in that open space, no matter how much gravel you put down. So that's something, if you want to put a gravel path down, be prepared to defend it better than I do, because I do a terrible job. And I've met so many collaborators just by sitting out there on a sunny day. So this is like the advantage of an urban prairie, is that people walk around, and people have just walked by and said, what is this? And I've explained it to them, and they're like, hey, can I bring Boy Scouts out here? I'm like, yeah, you can bring Boy Scouts out here. So that's an advantage of an urban prairie, is that people who walk around are easily influenced by what you're putting out. And so I think those are really good opportunities to engage with the public and kind of grow your influence as well. I would like to hear any comments or questions if anybody has them. So somebody asked me in the chat, when you cut it back in February, could it be mowed? It could be mowed. This is really goofy. One of the things that we do is I just have like a bunch of these shears, right? These like long shears. And most people would think like it'd be a really boring, tedious activity to go cut down the prairie to like this level with a bunch of shears. But it turns out college students who have been cramped up in their dorms, if you just give them shears and it's like, go cut everything down, they go nuts. I literally cut that prairie down one time. It was fully overgrown. I cut it down. I say my student volunteers, we probably had 12 different shears. We cut that prairie down in like an hour. And you probably could have mowed it, but you would have had to cut it down because you have such tall grasses and such tall plants that it makes it really challenging. And so that's something that you have to think about as well, is that like some plants don't mow well. I've noticed that as well, is that some plants just simply don't want to mow well. How many years did it take to get more invasive plants to stop growing? There's still invasive plants that sneak in there. But I think after like the first year, it settled down a little bit. I still have to go there and pull things out. And honestly, like in a college setting, it's kind of nice that there are invasive plants that grow. I know that sounds really weird, but like that's a great opportunity to go and show them like what is a native plant and what is an invasive plant. And so a lot of times it does a great job of just teaching, which is one of the reasons why I wanted that prairie in the first place. Do you leave cut parts of the garden for mulch or haul it away? So this, I have shame. I'm about to tell you about some shame that I have. Sometimes we have to haul away all of that green plant matter that we cut. That kills me because frankly, we're doing something that is still out of sync with like the proper ecological realm of what we're trying to put together, right? We shouldn't be cutting down plants and then taking that plant life and throwing it away. We should be able to compost it. Sometimes composting is challenging because if you have a plant that's dominating, it can often like enrich in your compost when you put it back out there. So that's a challenge that is there. But I hate throwing away like plant material because like it's out of sync with kind of the carbon cycling that we're trying to achieve, right? So I'm still looking for a spot to maybe compost that and then turn it into mulch or soil or whatever we can get. That's something that we're still working on. I have somebody that kind of contacted me through another prairie that is being run in Houston, and they volunteered maybe to help me in the future as well, cut down and even compost some of that stuff. So, and that was somebody that I met that lived in that neighborhood that just saw me. So it's like I said, it's crazy how many collaborators you can make just by standing out there.
I have a question. When you were dealing with, like, especially the first year students, did you have a feeling that they were aware of the prairies around Houston or the places they could go? Had they ever been to the Katy Prairie? Did they walk? Did they do more than just jog around Memorial Park?
I don't know. They don't know. And that's what's really interesting. And I don't say that to like sap some of your strength, because I know a lot of you do great work out there and trying to educate the population. But I mean, I don't think prairies in Houston have hit the level that they need to hit yet. And I think that what I'd like for Houstonians to do is to start identifying more with prairie and make it more part of like our social culture. But you know, in my introductory biology class, I tell the students, I show them pictures of prairie and I say, this is what this is supposed to be. And many of them are in complete disbelief. And to be honest, it's not surprising that they would be in disbelief just because they've never seen or experienced anything like that. And so that's something that I do often as well is when I teach ecology, part of my assignment is for the students to go visit local prairies and get an idea of what is out there. And so that's the other thing is that like plug everybody else, right? So if you have like a prairie, if you have like a conservation, something or other, tell everybody about all of the prairies, because most of these kids don't know the things that you know, right? And so that's why, you know, in my little plan of action, the first thing was to educate, because you'll find that most people don't know. And so if you start with education, like here are all the prairies, this is something that exists in Houston. There's a community of people that do it. All of a sudden they realize that like Dr. Amin's not some crazy wackadoo who's sitting out in like a lot with a bunch of sunflowers. Like he's actually onto something, right? So plug everybody. I think that's a really good thing to do because it strengthens the community overall. I'd like to say just before y'all kick me out here, thank y'all for having me. I think that what all of you do is so very important. I feel very privileged to come and talk to y'all. And I think that like, as long as you engage young people, we're going in the right direction, right? So thank y'all for everything that y'all do. And I really hope that, hopefully this will help you. And if you ever need anything from me, right, particularly related to conservation, please know that I'd love to help you. If you want me to plug your conservation event to students, by all means, send it to me and I will. Just know that like sometimes if you do something like at like 10 a.m., which is really good for getting some community volunteers, most college students are in class at that time, so you might have to organize something for them. But if you ever want to kind of share stuff with college students, please reach out to me. My wife, Cassidy, will also share it with HEC individuals as well. So just don't be afraid to engage with that group of individuals.